Back Home Media.
Hello, and welcome to In the Free Zone with Norm. Derek is with us as always. Derek, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good. We're going out to my Facebook page. Hopefully we can get some cool people to hang out with us. That would be sweet.
That would be sweet, yeah. Sorry, totally lost my train of thought right there in the middle of everything. Guys, we're tonight we're going to be talking about several things, but one of the things that we're going to talk about is Sha'Carri Richardson and what happened to her with the Olympic Games and the World Anti-Doping Agency. And so we're going to talk about that subject a little bit. One of the things we want to talk about is, she tested positive, not for any performance-enhancing drug, but tested positive for THC or marijuana. And so is that a performance-enhancing drug? Should she have been taken off, suspended from the Olympics and taken off the Olympic roster and all that kind of stuff? Those are all kind of things that we're going to be talking about. First up, though, one thing that I will say about Sha'Carri Richardson is she has owned this. She has owned it right from the first. She never denied using THC. She never blamed other people. She owned it right from the first. She said, yeah, I did it. I made a mistake. I knew the consequences. Here's what I did, basically. So she owned up to it right away. And to me, you've got to respect that. The fact that she didn't try to blame other people or do anything like that. She owned up to it. Now, that's talking in her defense. At the same time, anybody can go to the WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. Anybody can go to the WADA website and see a list of prohibited substances. Okay, and there are actually, I looked it up just a minute ago, just to double check. There are actually 3 categories. There are substances that are prohibited at all times. There are substances that are prohibited in competition, and there are substances that are prohibited in particular sports. Now, prohibited at all times, you will not find THC or marijuana on that list, but it is on the prohibited in competition list. Prohibited in competition are all stimulants, all narcotics, all cannabinoids, and all glucocorticoids. I am not a doctor. I am not an expert on this stuff by any means, and I'm not real sure what glucocorticoids are off the top of my head. I would have to look that one up. I can handle stimulants, narcotics, and cannabinoids, though.
Right.
Yeah. So the first question is THC a performance-enhancing drug? And
can we, before we get to that point, can we
Sure.
kind of go over so this hit the headlines. Now the hysteria was, this is a racist move. This is something, there's also what about Phelps? He got all those medals. He was caught consuming cannabis. I guess, where are we at on this as far as how much of this is I guess if we're just going to say it, white America keeping down athletes because of THC, or is this actually a bigger scale? Does it have nothing to do with what Americans think about THC?
That's a great question. First of all, this doesn't have anything to do with the U.S. This is the World Anti-Doping Agency, okay? And it's based in Canada. And Canada is probably, don't get me wrong, it's not run by the government of Canada. That's not what I'm saying. But the World Anti-Doping Agency is based in Canada. It's not even based in the U.S. It is the agency that oversees all international competitions and determines whether or not people are cheating, okay? Now, the World Anti-Doping Agency has not been without scandal. They have had some scandals, particularly they suspended all Russian athletes. As a matter of fact, basically suspended Russia as a nation for 4 years. Eventually that cut that in half and let the Russians come back just in time to compete in an Olympic Games, which was, one of those big, I don't know, scandal's the right word for it, but it certainly made a lot of people question what was going on. And so they're not necessarily above question. Okay. But that being said, I don't think that the World Anti-Doping Agency's motivations are racial. Now, the Michael Phelps thing has come up. You're right. But one thing I would say, and again, here, I'm talking off the top of my head a little bit, but to the best of my knowledge, Michael Phelps was shown to be using marijuana well after he won his gold medals. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that he wasn't using it before he won his gold medals. He probably was. But when he was definitively shown to have been using it was well after he had won his gold medals. He was not, as a matter of fact, he was not even involved in competitive swimming anymore, I don't think. Although he may have been, but certainly it was after the Olympic Games and after he won all his gold medals and all of that. He may have still been swimming. I don't remember exactly what the timing of his retirement in there was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'll be honest with you, I don't think that probably marijuana use is all that uncommon among athletes. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are plenty of athletes that don't use it, but my guess is there are probably plenty of athletes that do.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like, because a lot of it has to do with, you know, just the fact that marijuana has been a very demonized, you know, substance for years and years and years. A lot of it, you know, maybe not, in my opinion, you know, the what was the crazy movie where they were
Reefer Madness?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reefer madness going on when it comes to cannabis and the cannabis talk in America. But like, I guess when it comes to sports, really, I always thought like the reason that a high school would drug test athletes is because like, obviously, at least in the 90s when I went to school, if somebody was smoking cannabis on a regular basis, you were probably worried about them. Even if you were my age and it was your friend, you're like, you're breaking the law, buddy. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, you know, we're not talking about high school students here, but let me ask you this: as a coach, say you're a swimming coach and Michael Phelps is he's a 21-year-old athlete and you're right. Coaching him. You find out he smokes cannabis at night before he goes to bed. Like, what does that, I mean, forget all the laws and the rules. Like, what does that do to you as a coach? Like, what are your thoughts on him doing something like that to go to sleep at night?
All right. So as a high school coach, to me, this is a completely different issue.
Yeah. Different talk, obviously.
Right. Okay. Because a teenager's brain is not, it is already undergoing chemical changes without the interference of any drugs. Mm-hmm. Okay. A teenager's brain is already undergoing changes and is still not fully developed. Okay. And I realize physically the brain is fully developed, but chemically it's not. Chemically, it's still, the personality is still being shaped. It's still undergoing changes. Okay. So when you're dealing with a teenager, there are different dangers than when you're dealing with an adult.
Right.
Okay. And so I would say that drug use among a teenager is more concerning and for different reasons than drug use among an adult is.
Right. I heard the magic number is 25. That's kind of when your brain is done sort of molding itself or whatever.
That certainly could be. I'm not a doctor. I don't know exactly when it would be, but that certainly would not surprise me if it's somewhere in that neighborhood. You know, to be honest with you, that's the whole idea behind, well, that's one of the ideas behind pushing the drinking age higher and higher, you know, right. Is again, alcohol, to be honest with you, and this is one of those things that, you know, we talk about some, but we don't talk about it a whole lot. Alcohol is in many ways worse for you than marijuana is. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, you're talking about a toxic substance. Okay. Alcohol is a toxic substance that is systemic as can be, attacks all sorts of systems in your body, permanently damages all sorts of systems in your body. Okay. And that's not me saying you shouldn't drink a beer or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. But what I'm saying is long-term alcohol use or abuse is probably a better word. Long-term alcohol abuse is much more detrimental to the body than long-term marijuana use. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you can make an argument that long-term marijuana use might have more effect on the brain than alcohol does, but it certainly has less effect on the body. At the same time, we all know that we've all learned the dangers of tobacco use, and marijuana is certainly not any better than tobacco for your lungs.
Right.
Okay. As a matter of fact, I don't know, but my guess would be because most people don't use filters, it's probably worse.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So you're probably sucking a lot of unfiltered smoke into your lungs, so anytime you're sucking smoke into your lungs, that's a bad thing, no matter what the source of the smoke is, whether it's a campfire or a cigarette or whatever it is. Sucking smoke into your lungs is not a good thing for you physically.
And if you're a high schooler watching this, vaping isn't any better.
No, it is not. It absolutely is
devil.
not. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind there,
Well,
so,
alcohol's kind of, because marijuana is a very new thing. There's a handful of states that have, made it legal and stuff. But alcohol, if you watch any sports movie, even if it's a high school sports movie, there's a party scene. Like, there's obviously alcohol consumption is something that all coaches have dealt with at a high school level, where you hear about, at Jimmy's house this weekend, everybody got smashed and you guys are going to run until you vomit today. Like, I guess how do you feel like the conversation is different? And I guess why does alcohol, like what's her name? What's the girl's name that got kicked off the team? I'm not smart.
Oh, Sha'Carri Richardson.
Why is she allowed to go drink, 5 Long Island iced teas immediately after her meet, and they're not going to do anything to her? I mean, I guess in your opinion, why does alcohol get the free pass as far as being something that affects your, your motor skills and all that? And it's just like, all right.
Here's one thing. I don't know the definitive answer, but one of the first things I would point to is the fact that your body metabolizes alcohol so quickly that it's nearly impossible to test for it. Okay. Unless you catch somebody while they're actually drunk, you're not probably going to be able to test for alcohol because your body metabolizes it so quickly. Okay. Unlike, marijuana or cocaine or stimulants of any kind, it's not something that you can, take a urine test or, something like that and find it in the body for a period of time, So that's one thing. One reason why we don't stigmatize alcohol as much is because, we can't really test for it.
Right.
Okay. But number two is, and this is to a certain extent one of those Eurocentric things. And I'm not talking about a racial thing here, but a cultural thing. Alcohol is far more culturally accepted.
Right.
And that's part of it too. Right or wrong. I'm not making a value judgment.
I was going to say, and you just did like a 4-minute bit about how it's not great for you. and you also said that neither is marijuana, but I mean, obviously it's more accepted, but I mean, it's one of those things where it does have a tremendous, recall on your body, and there's a lot of people I know that their life is a mess because of alcohol. Some people can just do it every once in a while. Some people make it a problem, So let me ask you this. I've always been curious what your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on so we either have to have it to where athletes have zero chemistry going into their body, or I mean, I guess where do you draw the line? What makes something a performance enhancing drug? Because I know that Olympic athletes, college football players, I know they're getting supplements. They're taking supplements, they're taking pills.
Yeah.
Who decides what makes the cut as what is okay and what's not okay?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And the answer for Olympic athletes, at least, is the WADA. They are the sole authority, basically, on what are acceptable substances and non-acceptable substances. As a matter of fact, they have a list on their website of not just prohibited substances, but substances that aren't allowed. Okay. I know that's kind of a subtle difference, but here. Oh, I'm sorry, not allowed, but non-approved substances. Okay. So there are prohibited substances and then there are non-approved substances. The end result of those is they're basically the same, though, whether it's a prohibited substance or a non-approved substance. But the WADA determines that. Now, as far as all the time, basically the substances can be broken down into two things. They are either performance enhancing or they are masking agents. Okay. Now, a masking agent is something that you can take that will mask a positive test for a performance enhancing drug. Okay. Now, those are prohibited at all times. It's only during the competition phase then that what we think of as recreational drugs become prohibited. Cannabinoids, stimulants, narcotics. Okay. Those become prohibited during competition phases. So, is THC in some way a performance enhancing drug? Obviously, I'm not an expert, but my gut feeling would be to say no. If anything, it seems to me it would be a performance inhibiting drug. You know, and I'll be honest with you. To be honest, it probably doesn't have much effect on performance one way or the other, depending on how heavy the use is and all kinds of things like that. I mean, let's face it, there are tons of different levels of usage. You know what I'm saying? Somebody that smokes a joint every now and then to blow off some steam or when they're hanging out with friends is completely different from the person that uses THC on an everyday basis and maybe even a, multiple times a day type of basis, right? Those are two completely different levels of usage. Mm-hmm. The one level of usage, occasional recreational usage, my guess would be that that's not going to have any impact on performance, positive or negative. Whereas heavy usage might have a negative impact on performance, just like heavy usage of alcohol or heavy usage of tobacco or heavy usage of food or,
soda.
Yeah, exactly. Heavy usage of a ton of different things can have a negative impact on performance, So obviously there are differences in levels of usage, but listen, here's something. When we talk about the cultural acceptability of alcohol, I want to give everybody just a little bit of a history lesson here. Okay. All of you, we're going to go to Christopher Columbus. Okay. Actually, we could even go back a bit before that, but, Europe had trade with China. Okay. They had trade with the Far East, and that trade was overland. Okay. And it went through the Middle East into Western China in what's now the Xinjiang province, the Taklamakan Desert, and across that way into China. Okay. And you've always been told in school that when Europe's overland route was cut off, by the way, for those of you that don't know your history, the reason why Europe's overland route was cut off, their trade routes with China, was the sudden explosion of Islam in the Middle East. Okay. And some of those Islamic countries cut off those trade routes. Okay. But you've always been told that what the Europeans were really looking for was spices. Okay. They were looking for the Spice Islands and, they wanted to reestablish trades with the East mostly for spices. It wasn't just for spices though. Okay. It was also for drugs. Europe's primary drug was alcohol. It was the only thing that was really native to Europe. Okay. Was ways of producing alcohol. Most other drugs, certainly narcotics, opioids, they came from the East. Okay. And still to this day are grown much more in Asia than they are anywhere else in the world. Okay. They are grown all over the world. Don't get me wrong, but grown much more in Asia than anywhere else. And so that was also a factor of Europe trying to reestablish trade with China, which is what Columbus's journey was all about. Right. Mm-hmm. And all of you have been filled full of that horse crap that Columbus thought the world was round and other people thought the world was flat. Everybody knew the world was round. Okay. The argument was basically was how big the world was. Okay. Columbus was saying the world's a lot smaller than you think it is. I can sail west and get east in a relatively short period of time. The people that were arguing with Columbus were saying the world's a lot bigger than you think it is, and you have no clue what's out there if you go west. Okay.
You ever heard of Texas, buddy?
Yeah. Well, and Columbus was so wrong that to this day we call Native Americans Indians because he thought he landed in India. Okay. When where he really landed was Hispaniola, which is the modern day island that contains Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Okay. So yeah, Christopher Columbus proved himself dead wrong with his voyage, but
did he die knowing he was wrong, that wasn't India?
Oh yeah. Oh
okay.
yeah.
I was like, did he at least know? Like,
yeah, he knew right away. I mean, he figured it out pretty quickly. But here's the thing. Spain was in a unique position to exploit the New World. Okay? They had just finished a 400-year, what the Spanish called the Reconquista, a 400-year process of retaking southern Spain from the Moors, who were Muslims from Africa. Okay? So Spain had spent 400 years trying to drive the Muslims out of Spain and reclaim it for Christianity, for the Roman Catholic Church. And they finished that in 1492. There's a reason why Columbus sailed in 1492. It's because that's when the Reconquista was finished. And the Spanish king and queen granted him men and ships. And so once he discovered the New World, discovered in quotation marks, because God knows there were already a crap load of people here. Okay. Once he found this new land, Spain had all these unemployed soldiers hanging around because they'd just finished a 400-year war, and they literally poured them into the New World. There's a reason why they were called conquistadors, conquerors. Okay. Spain was not an exploration of the New World. It was a conquest of the New World. Okay. And that really gave shape to the whole, not just Spain, but then the colonization of the New World by other European powers later. You know, it really gave shape to the whole thing. And so right from the first, the exploration of the New World was not really an exploration. It was a conquest, you know. And so that was started by Columbus. Columbus also started the slave trade. Columbus and Ponce de Leon, it was the Spanish that started the slave trade, you know, and a lot of people don't really think about that or know that. They think of the slave trade as a unique.
I thought Toby Keith started it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we think of the slave trade because here in the U.S., we tend to be very, you know, centered on ourselves. We tend to think of the slave trade as something that the Southern U.S. started. Yeah. Okay. Southern U.S. did not start the slave trade. The Spanish started the slave trade in the Caribbean. First, they enslaved the native Caribbean Indians, and then after all the natives of the Caribbean were pretty much gone, the Carib and the Arawak and all those cultures basically died. More from disease than from other things, but still, you know, obviously the disease was part of the horrendous conditions of their slavery. That's when then the Spanish began to import slaves from Africa to work their plantations in the Caribbean.
Did you know this in 2001?
Sure.
Why didn't you tell us?
Well, partially because I taught English, not history.
But I mean, like, maybe Doug Woods covered some of this stuff, but I mean, you always hear that everything that's taught in American schools about history is wrong. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's something we do on purpose? We want to rewrite history so people believe a certain way, or do you think that there's just a lot of gray area with history where we don't really know, so we just go with the best story? I mean, I think tell the truth in high school, but I always just thought like everything that I was told in high school, like later on after I got in like my 20s, I was like, that's not what they told us, you know, like you said, Columbus was proving the world wasn't, you know, around. Like, why do you think that narrative gets dumbed down to the version of it is to the American school systems? I think, and I could be dead wrong here, but I think it's institutional laziness as much as anything. I think that, we bite on what is the good or the easy story, you know? That sounds good. That sounds like it makes sense, you know? Most of us learned as much from, God, I hate to say this, especially my generation. Most of us learned as much from,
TV and Saturday morning cartoons and crap like that as we did in class. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it comes to history. And it wasn't always necessarily true. You know, it was often a rather fanciful creation. You know, I mean, think about a lot of the history of the early U.S. and the history of the Revolution and all that, you know. Well, you've learned about Betsy Ross and you've learned about Paul Revere and you've learned about, well, all those people existed, but they really weren't nearly as important as they were made out to be, but they just had good stories and those stories stuck, you know.
So it's like the Bible.
Yeah, well, now you're going to get me in trouble here. Now, the Bible, but I'm glad you brought up the Bible because it's a good example. The Bible doesn't necessarily say what people say it does.
Exactly.
Okay? Yeah. Because a lot of people cherry pick stories out of the Bible and they say that this illustrates this and this illustrates this. Okay? That's why you got to read the Bible yourself if you want to know what it really says. Okay, don't take other people's word for it as far as what it says.
We're topic hopping, but I love it. Let me ask you this: I am not asking you about your belief system. I don't want to put that on the internet. I want to know, you've read the Bible, right? Like you've read pieces of it. You've read the Bible.
I'm going to tell you that I have probably read all of the Bible.
Let me ask you this.
I don't remember all of it, though.
Let me ask you this, though, and this is, again, nothing to do with your belief system. Me and Ian were talking about this 2 nights ago. Ian was like, if they made like a Game of Thrones version of the Bible, it would be the best show ever. Because a lot of people don't realize what's in that book, you know, like, I mean, and most of your like lukewarm Christians, you know, and that's nothing wrong with them, whatever you do to get through your day. But like, you know, if you really peruse through that thing, there's some wild stuff in that book.
There is
a great HBO show.
Yeah, first of all, a lot of the Bible is not telling you how to live your life. A lot of it is, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is also not. A lot of the Bible is a history, okay? And so, yeah, you're right. In the history, sure, there's all kinds of stories, you know, the story of Solomon and, you know, David's story, you know, and all of that. Those are great stories, and they're full of betrayals, and they're full of, yeah, you're right. It is in some ways very Game of Thrones-ish, right? It's all about power plays and politics and betrayal, and there is a lot of that in the Bible. Yeah, there certainly is. Okay. And so, yeah, it was, you know, it's one of the, and not only that, but think about the first 4 books of the New Testament. Okay. The Gospels, basically. You've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All 4 of them tell the same story from a completely different point of view. And in many ways, it doesn't seem like the same story because, as we all know, your story is so dependent on your point of view, okay? And so basically, those 4 books of the Bible all tell the same story, but they all tell it in a different way because they're all told from a different point of view. And so it seems like completely different stories. And that's not the only place in the Bible where that occurs, okay? But it is one really good example. And so, there's... First of all, like anything that you read, the Bible is open to interpretation, okay? And people will always interpret it. But one thing that I would encourage anybody is, regardless of your beliefs, okay, almost all of us, if not actively Christian, almost all of us are culturally Christian. Right. Does that make sense? Do you understand the distinction?
Kind of like you're born Jewish. If you're born like in certain parts of America, you're just, you're right. Christian.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter how much we try to deny it. The United States is a Christian nation. Okay. Doesn't mean that that's the only religion. But it does mean that it is, number one, the predominant religion, and number 2, the popular cultural religion.
Well, the dollar where it says "In God We Trust," we know they're not talking about Allah. we're talking about God, you know, like the Christian God, you know. Exactly. So you're right. I mean, it is one of those things where like you're just kind of a Christian by default, being this right. And if you're not Christian, if you're living in like Kansas, you're not going to buy beer on Sunday unless they change that. But like there's certain things you're not going to be able to do because you're Christian. You live here. You're Christian, So like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And so what I'm saying is, if you are a Christian, even if you're not necessarily an active Christian, even if you wouldn't consider yourself religiously a Christian, but you're still probably culturally Christian, okay? You owe it to yourself to at least read a little bit of the Bible, okay? Mm-hmm. And if you are an active Christian, then you ought to be reading it all the time, okay? And in most of your Bibles, if you're not a big reader, in most of your Bibles, if you look at the back, there's a guide for how you can read the Bible in a year, right? And it's like a couple verses in the morning, couple verses in the evening, right? And you can read the whole Bible in a year if you stick with that. So if you're one of those people that needs a plan, there's a plan for you. But everybody should read it for themselves, and everybody should interpret it for themselves. That was the whole. To a certain extent, that's what the Protestant Reformation was all about, okay? Whereas the Catholic Church during the medieval period particularly, and even on into the Renaissance, they tried to control information. They didn't, they wrote the Bible, tended to put out issues of the Bible that were in languages that nobody other than priests spoke, and, which is not quite true, because speaking Latin was a lot more common in those days, but the average person wasn't educated enough to read the Bible. And a lot of what the Protestant Reformation was that we shouldn't need the church to be a go-between between us and God, that we as Christians should be able to go to God directly, and that all of us should be able to read the Bible and interpret it for ourselves. We shouldn't have to have a priest interpret it for us, and so on and so on. And now again,
that's really radical thinking back then. People
it was in its day. Yeah. It was radical.
Imagine being able to talk. Make this say, can I talk to God? I don't know. I don't think we can do that. It's like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and so that's one of those things philosophically. And don't get me wrong, the philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church has changed a ton since then too. Okay, so I'm not casting aspersions on the Roman Catholic Church by any means. Yeah. We're talking about the Catholic Church during the medieval and Renaissance period, not the modern Catholic Church. But right. Yeah, so there was a shift in thought, and that was basically what the Protestant Reformation was about, or at least one of the things the Protestant Reformation was about. And wow, how did we get off on religion?
This is great, man. This is great. Tracy says much more research than this sports guy ever did on a topic. I don't know. This is good stuff. Ian's really into the Bible. Like he's spent a lot of time reading. He's listened to a lot. You know how you can listen to lectures from prestigious schools and stuff, and he's listened to a ton of really long lectures about the Lost Sea Scrolls, all that kind of stuff. And it's there's a lot of people say that they're Christian, but you're right. If you're really Christian, you should probably be reading that stuff pretty often, at least kind of get an idea of what you're doing. But that's So now that we're talking about integrity and being good people, let's take this back to the beginning of this conversation. Now, when we're talking about this group in Canada that's the anti-doping, what are they fighting for? Are they fighting for the integrity of the sport and to protect the records of those that didn't have these? And at what point do we have to give up on this battle and just start a new record book that says these people are? And what are your thoughts on that? On a grown up with athletes that will straight up sign a waiver that says, I don't care what happens to me. I want to be the most super athlete in the world. Do you think that there is a market for that in this world? And then what do you think about that? Because I'm sure if we would let people just take any kind of drug they want and perform, we would have some really crazy records coming out,
Yeah, that's okay. So that's it, right? The World Anti-Doping Agency basically is the official, it's not like, they have or at least it's not like they should have an agenda. I can't guarantee you they don't, but they shouldn't have an agenda. The whole point of the WADA is for them to be the official of competition, no, maybe let me rephrase that. The official of preparation for competition. Okay, you have another official for the actual competition, but they're the ones that officiate the preparation for competition. Okay, and obviously the WADA wouldn't have come into being if a whole lot of people weren't cheating to begin with. Okay, And so, yeah, their idea is to protect the integrity of the sport. And a lot of that, like you kind of touched on, is the integrity of records, right? So that we can compare an athlete from 200 years ago to an athlete from today.
Which you can't even do. Like if you look at like
you can't. But
they were showing, what was it? They were showing like boxers or somebody from like 100 years ago next to somebody who now. And again, this person to the right's not taking any illegal substances, but they're taking something. But it's comical. Like it's not even comparable how much bigger human beings are today than they were 100 years ago. So I feel like at some point, like, those older records, like even if these people are using something, I mean, they're just bigger people. I mean, maybe they grew up next to a power plant or something, but these are just large human beings that are capable of doing some crazy stuff. But I don't know. I just feel like with that records thing, like eventually I don't know. I guess, John Gilmore has records still at Elkhart High School, So like,
yeah, so
I guess it's true.
So does Thane Baker,
Yeah.
But that's a little different. Okay. I mean, and plus you're talking there about 50 years instead of 200 years. But no, here's a great example. What you're talking about people being bigger. In 1985, there was one player in the NFL that was over 300 pounds. Okay. And that was William Perry, the refrigerator. Okay. Today, I have no clue how many players in the NFL are over 300 pounds, but it's a significant percentage of the players in the NFL, right? Virtually all of your linemen, offensive or defensive, but especially your offensive linemen, are 300 pounds plus.
Ben Roethlisberger's 240 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Most of your quarterbacks and running backs, wide receivers, are often in the mid to even upper 200s. So there is no doubt that the average NFL player today is hugely different. Or differently huge compared to NFL players of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So yes, there has certainly been a difference in that. Now, what has caused that difference? I think we could argue several different things, but certainly one of them is training technique. Training technique has absolutely improved. Okay. So training is the first performance enhancer, right? Physical training, lifting weights, running, knowing how to lift weights and how to run and how to train, right? Exercise science has advanced leaps and bounds in the last 50 years, in the last 20 years even, okay? As a coach, I know now that a lot of the things that we did as a part of physical training when I was in high school, we now know those are totally counterproductive. They weren't helping us at all, and there are coaches today that will still argue with you, but those are coaches that have not done a whole lot of exercise science, have not read a whole lot, okay? Here's one of the best examples. If I send somebody out to run a mile, okay, what have I just done to that athlete? Well, I have just made that athlete slower and less explosive. Okay? Now, we're talking incremental amounts. We're not talking anything that's, if I send you out to run 1 mile, it's not like I can measure the decrease in your
You're not going from James Jenkins to Derek Rutherford.
Right, exactly. But if I train you running nothing but distances, you're going to get slower and you're going to get less explosive. That's why even distance runners don't train running nothing but distances. Does that make sense? Okay. So we know now so much more about how to train an athlete to get peak performance. We know when to build up their workouts and when to taper their workouts. We know, percentages that we should train them at, right? And we know all that kind of stuff, and exercise science has become so much better, and it will continue, I'm sure, to improve. Okay, so that's one of the first things, is training methods are so much better now than they were in the past. Genetics may play a factor in it. Nutrition definitely plays a factor in it. Some people would say we've probably maybe even kind of, I don't know. Nutrition is such a performance inhibitor for high school kids. So many of our high school kids, their diets are so poor. They're loaded with sugar and caffeine and, all these things. And they don't get the protein that they need. They don't get a lot of the nutritional things that they need for their bodies to be at peak performance. As a matter of fact, the 3 most basic performance enhancers for a high school kid are sleep, proper nutrition, and proper hydration. If you can get a kid that and just take them and get them to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, get them to eat enough, eat the proper nutrition. In other words, enough carbohydrates, enough protein, what we call those macronutrients, and you can get them to stay hydrated, you're going to enhance their performance right there. And kids, I think a lot of times don't understand the damage that they do to their own bodies and to their own performance with poor nutrition, poor hydration, and a lack of sleep. And nobody is worse about those 3 things than teenagers, to be honest with you. And so that's one of those things too, as a coach that we kind of struggle with. Is
in a high school athlete, school's not easy. You have practice all day after school, and then a lot of these kids have to go to work sometimes, go do some type of work and then go home. And they want to sit there and play their computer. They want to play on their, gaming systems. And so the sleep gets pushed later and later.
Yeah. Time management skills. If you can teach kids time management skills, it helps them, so much. There's time to do the things you enjoy, but you got to kind of know when it's time to do the things you enjoy and when it's time to do the things you have to do, and nobody wants to do those things that you have to do, well, I can't say nobody. Most people don't want to do those things they have to do. We want to do what we want to do, and so that's one of those things that you struggle with as a coach too, and those are the most simple performance enhancers of all. They really are. Just get enough sleep, eat the right things, stay hydrated. And we harp on that all the time with our kids. We tell them, take a drink every time you go by the water fountain, carry now, which now we can't do, right? COVID killed that. Now the water fountains are all shut down, but most schools have put in those bottle filling stations. And so now you have them carry a water bottle with them all the time, but that, to me, one of the scariest things about COVID was when so many schools shut down all their water fountains, we started seeing some real problems with hydration in some of our athletes, and what you see is increased cramping, but you also see proper hydration is, and most people don't realize this, proper hydration is necessary to optimal functioning of your nerve synapses, okay, for your nerves to fire at their optimum rate, right? And most people don't realize that hydration has anything to do with that, but it does. They only think, if I don't stay hydrated, I'm going to get cramps. Well, that's true, you can, but there's a lot more going on than you realize with hydration. And then, of course, sugar and things like that can interfere with the functions of a lot of those things too.
Well, that's another double-edged sword, because most schools, they'll have the soda machines, and it's because there's funding that comes along with that, right? Typically,
yeah. So
it's I'm sure the coaches hate that part of the.
Well, yeah, most schools try to limit, and there have been different. I guess the word is laws. There's been legislation, that's impacted what you can and can't serve in those vending machines at school. You don't see too many just Coke and Pepsi machines and stuff like that. What you will see is you'll see like sports drinks. You'll see Powerade and Gatorade and things like that in there. You'll see like Coke Zero and, some Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi and that kind of thing. You'll see those in there. They do try to cut down on the sugary stuff. But yeah, you're right. A lot of it is funding because most schools have a contract with either Coke or Pepsi and they're exclusive to one company or the other in their vending machines, right? I'm trying to remember. It seems like Elkhart was a Coke school. Exactly. When I taught there, I think, you had Coke machines and you had Powerade and all of that. I think Liberal is too. I think they've got Powerade in their vending machines. And so, yeah, so a lot of times your schools will have an exclusive contract with one soda manufacturer or another. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they do get some money from that and they get discounts on product. And not only that, but as some schools will find out, they use the money from those vending machines to pay for certain things. And, even if it's just miscellaneous type stuff, miscellaneous supplies, office supplies for your classrooms, right? Pens, pencils, tablets, that type of thing. Or it could be plenty of other things. But you start shutting those machines down and suddenly now you realize how much that revenue helps out. And so a lot of schools, the vending machines help pay for stuff that they wouldn't have ways to pay for any other way. And sometimes you got to shut them down to really realize the impact. And so it's one of those things. It's a little frustrating, but at the same time, they have done a much better job now than they used to do of making sure that what's in those vending machines is a little healthier. So
that's a big industry. I remember when I was in high school, man, like you took at least $3 in quarters every day to school, just in case you needed a soda, some kind of, that was, and the biggest, I think back every day. I'm like, why didn't I just go to Dollar General and just buy like a 500 Pop-Tarts and just pop my trunk in the parking lot and be like $4 a pack, and people would have paid it in seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, man, I should have been like an entrepreneur in high school. I could have been selling snacks because snacks are really important to class. In my opinion,
I know kids that do that. They'll go to Walmart or the Dollar General and they'll buy a bunch of that stuff, load their backpack with it, and they're selling it to their buddies.
Capitalism, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there is, but there isn't. Everybody
else should have thought of that, but they didn't. So now they're like, well, I'll pay the hassle tax. Here you go.
Yeah, I don't mind a little entrepreneurial spirit, as long as nobody's getting hurt by it.
Right. Nobody's getting beat up for Little Debbie debt.
Exactly. Yeah, as long as we don't have a black market in Little Debbie's, people are dying over. People are dying over Little Debbie turf. But that's just, and you said capitalism, and that's exactly right. That's what free markets are all about. Where there's a demand, somebody will fulfill that demand. Somebody will create a supply to fulfill that demand. So it's one of those things.
Yeah, I remember in middle school we had a store. Miss Wilson used to run it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was dope. It was like every day after school, she would open her classroom up and they'd put a bunch of candy out. And
and it was probably funding like student council or something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
It was like the student store or whatever. But yeah, it was awesome. And I'd go in there every day after school and get stuff.
Yeah, I understand. All right, so Sha'Carri Richardson, let's kind of try to get back to her. Okay. So Sha'Carri Richardson, again, she was not banned by the U.S. Olympic Committee. She was not banned by, the U.S. Olympic team or anything like that. That's one thing I do want people to understand. She tested positive for THC, and she was then suspended for 1 month, I believe, by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Now, if I remember right, her 1 month suspension would have ended after her individual events, but before some of the relay events. And so a lot of people were hopeful then that they would put her on the roster and let her run the relays. And this week it was kind of a surprise when the roster was released and she wasn't on the Olympic roster. So if there was a decision made by the U.S. team, that would be the decision that was made, was that they decided not to put her on the roster. I have no idea what the rationale behind that was or anything like that. There may be things going on. Well, not maybe. There absolutely are things going on there that I don't know about.
She had an amazing amount of support in the beginning, but then several homophobic tweets came out from a couple years ago. And she kind of lost a lot of her thun, and they were pretty. I'm a 38-year-old guy who thinks I'm edgy, and I was like, "Ooh, that's brave saying that," in this climate. And they were like maybe 2018, 2019, but yeah, just some very homophobic
and
tweets is what I think really sealed her fate.
Gotcha, and that's something that young athletes, if you want to go to college, if you
get off Facebook,
yeah. Exactly. Boy, you really want to be careful about your social media presence, okay? You want to make sure that everything in your social media presence is positive, that everything in your social media presence presents you in a light that you would like to be presented in if colleges were looking at your social media. Because they will be. If you're an athlete that's worth recruiting, they are looking at your social media, okay? And so, don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of value in letting kids be kids, but be aware that everything you tweet, everything you post on Facebook, everything you do on Snapchat or all those other things, any of that has the potential to come back and haunt you. Okay? I type tweets out all the time and never send them, because I realize the impact of things like that, and that once you send it out there, I
like having health insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Once you send it out there, it's out there forever. It's not like when I was a kid and you could say something dumb and probably the only people that heard it were 2 or 3 of your friends and they didn't remember it 2 days later, And so the world's not like that anymore. When you put stuff out on social media, it's out there forever, and people need to be aware of that,
Yeah, I won't be running for mayor anytime soon. My 20s were, I was one of the first test babies to, hey, just go ahead and put every thought you ever have out into the universe. Okay, blah, blah, and then there goes my political history, my political future, man.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. Man. Yeah, I mean, it's not just kids. We all ought to be more aware of it, to be honest with you, But yeah, it's especially if you're a kid that thinks you've got a shot at a college scholarship, which, by the way, most of you that think you do, I hate to break it to you, but you probably don't. Okay, and I'm just talking statistically there. I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade.
It's just like somebody that plays guitar at their local high school. It's like, it'd be real cool if you made it to be famous, but probably not. But have fun.
Exactly.
It's like
exactly, yeah. So, I'm just talking law of averages. But even if you think you have a chance, be very, very careful of what you put on social media. And really, to be honest with you, forget college scholarships. It's just what you put on social media, no matter what you do, what you put on social media could come back to haunt you. No matter what your job is, there are people all the time getting fired for things that they tweeted out. Sometimes 5, 6, years ago. I don't have no idea how long Twitter's been around. I know it hasn't been around. Yeah,
I see. There's a subreddit on Reddit called Bye Bye Job, and it's just filled with like 3 or 4 people a day that are being idiots and saying like homophobic, racist, saying just stuff that they would never say around people that they knew in real life, but they have like their work badge on, like an idiot, like in the TikTok videos. So all it takes is the internet about 9 minutes before they're like, hey, you don't have a job anymore. And then there's always a video. It's like, look what they posted 10 minutes later, and it's some adult like, I didn't mean it. It's like, that's what happens, dude. You said some really stupid, offensive stuff on the internet, and you happen to have your work badge on. Like, you deserve not to have a job anymore. You did it wrong. Like, if you're gonna say stuff like that, do it like they do in the Middle East. Put a thing over your face. You know, like you can't just go out saying your opinions in 2021 and not have any, especially if they're really crappy opinions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Boy, and Twitter, the thing about Twitter too is it is an outrage machine. You know, that's what Twitter does better than anything, is just drive outrage. People just get so worked up about, you know, and the responses are so vitriolic from both sides, you know. It kind of gets a little ridiculous. I get, don't get me wrong, I'm on Twitter and, you know, I use it, but yeah, I get really turned off by it a lot of times. And it's just that, yeah, there's like it should be, it is a free exchange of ideas. But what you have to remember is just because somebody has an opinion doesn't mean their opinion's worth listening to, you know? So that's just one of those things you have to, you know, kind of sort through and take with a grain of salt.
Before you die on a hill on social media, just always remember that you have the option to shut up.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said,
you
ought to just not send about 3/4 of the tweets that you type out, you know. That should just be a good rule of thumb. Just don't.
And the worst part is, say you don't lose your job, say you don't lose something. What happens when 7 years from now, a Facebook time hop, which happens to me often, it's like, hey, remember that time you said this? And you're just like, how did I do that? Oh my, you know, it's like, you're going to be reminded of this 5 years from now, and you might not think the same way that you do. You're probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I shed my skin about every 7 years. I find myself like, maybe I'm like this now, you know, like I'm very skeptical. Like, it's like I was talking to Phil Walrod, you know, he voted for Clinton and now he's like, would never vote for, it's just like, people change throughout life, man. It's beautiful, man. I like it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, it's crazy, and people need to be aware of the dangers out there, you know. Mm-hmm. But especially young people, because you got a lot more future in front of you, you know. So always be careful. Yeah. Wow. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really wanted to talk about tonight. No, I don't think so. I think we're good. Guys, as always, you know, In the Free Zone with Norm is a production of Back Home Media. So go to Back Home Media's webpage, check that out. Of course, check us out on our podcasting platforms below our faces. Go there, subscribe, download, review. Reviews help every podcast as much as possible. So yeah, subscribe, download, and review the podcast. We appreciate that.
In the last 30 days, we've had 150 downloads on our podcast.
So. Wow, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So please continue to do that. Please continue to subscribe and download and write reviews of those podcasts. And again, Back Home Media has a whole stable of podcasts that you can check out. So go there and check it all out. We'll be back with you again next week, guys. Again, not 100% sure what we've got going on next week. It's summer, and it'll probably stay kind of like that a little bit through the summer. But the dead week is over with, the summer moratorium. Students are back in the weight rooms and back out on the fields, working on things, physically improving themselves. And, you know, we're about a month from the start of a lot of these seasons. So the seasons are rolling around quickly. And, you know, I love summer, and I don't want to waste any of my summer, but at the same time, I'm also kind of looking forward to the beginning of all the seasons that we'll have coming up. So thanks for tuning in. Derek, thank you for being here with us. Mm-hmm. We appreciate it. And we'll see all of you next week.
Well, I don't think it, I thought it, that's different. I said what I said and I meant it, or lamented. Words given weight without thought in a person, the way that I talk and the way that I ought to be able to pause and to say that the ball can be placed on my arm, to display full assault, to disgrace in its arm. Pray for the day they could wait for the calm. You can't control the storm, only weather it, whether it's 5 weeks and 5 days of rain sideways, or scorched earth, search for death, or water left with all the thorns, with the petals gone, settle on the breath of autumn. If the ground fits, wear it, the crown fits.